even in a very developed economy that has really embraced ICT as one of the key vectors of growth for the future, you still see that there are significant challenges that you are facing. And I think that this is something that is recurrent in many of our countries. And Robert, you have substantive experience in dealing with governments in many different regions, in many different locations. And based on your experience during this challenge of passing from development to adaptation to use, which are the key challenges that you face that in general different countries are facing?
So you need to look at the challenges for each one of these. So for deployment, and there are a number of things, but let me just highlight a couple of things. One, it's the deployment really are the supply side issues. So access to resources. In many countries, it's about a fiber core. It could be, what are the barriers to deploying a core? What about access to rights of way, ducts, and so on? Actually, some of the things that were done here in Mexico that really was a game changer was using fiber that already had been deployed for a national electric grid and auctioning that off as a new fiber core backbone, right? And Mónica can tell us how successful that was, but it was a game changer, right? But that's the kind of thing that actually, allow access to, resources like that, including spectrum, is important. But there's another piece of that on the supply side, which is about access to devices. Right? So you need the devices as well. And on the deployment side, in conversations we had with government officials in Nigeria, they were concerned that up to 70% of the cost of deploying a core network in Nigeria, up to 70% were taxes and fees. Right? More than 2/3 of the cost were taxes. Right? And that is within government's ability to change. On the adoption side, price. So one of the things that we've been very actively engaged in is creating this Alliance for an Affordable Internet, which is now has over 50 or 60 participants, governments, NGOs, private sector. How do you begin to bring down the price of the service? And then there's the cost of the devices. And again, here, taxes are a real issue. Right? I said on the UN Broadband Commission, one of our conclusions about barriers to adoption are the high prices that result from high taxes. And our conclusion at the UN Broadband Commission is that ICT is not a luxury. It should not be taxed as though it's a luxury. Right? And in fact, in some countries, the taxes on devices and services are so high, the taxes are the equivalent on taxes on alcohol and tobacco. What people call sin taxes. ICT and broadband is not a sin. Right? It shouldn't be taxed that way. And then there are some of the obstacles on the usage side. And those are some of the things that we've already discussed and Mónica talked about. Skills, skill development, local content, local language, local applications. Right? And those are some obstacles that have to be overcome. And that's where the public-private partnership can begin to address them.
Thanks. And yeah, I think that you have been mentioning quite a lot about from the supply side, this access to resources, access to devices, and make it affordable. This is very important. It's very much dealing with how government is regulating, or which is the governance system of the model. And I know that this is changing in Mexico, Mónica. Do you think that these are some of the obstacles that Mexico is also facing, and how you are starting to address them? If you recognize that these are some of the key obstacles that is hindering Mexico's potential to benefit from ICT broader.
I'm sorry, I couldn't.
So Robert was mentioning that some of the key challenges that he sees when he goes to different countries and different governments is that, from the supply side, having access to resources so that you can invest in, the spectrum or broadband or getting devices to citizens, to companies, etc., is one of the key challenges. And yesterday, for example, here in Jalisco, we saw that one of the main objectives is to expand the access to these devices among the population and the SMEs in the country. And then it's also about prices, so how you make it more affordable. Taxation is a real issue, and I was just wondering, are these some of the key challenges that you also recognize for Mexico? Are there any other challenges that you think that might be more pressing? Which is your views on these obstacles?
Yes, thank you. Definitely, one of the very big challenges, and when I first started working in this sector, an amazing thing is that 1 kilometer of fiber optics deployed can cost 4 times more in one country than in another one. And it's of course not fiber optics, it's a commodity, it costs the same anywhere. And those costs that come from inefficiencies, that come from corruption in many cases, that come from just slowness. As in any business, you need to invest and recuperate the sooner as possible your money, and that makes a good business case. Here, when you have to take many months in order to get the permits and start deploying infrastructure, then you have a problem. So yes, we're working in that front very, very actively. And related with another part that was also mentioned, which is efficient access to existing resources, efficient allocation of the resources we have as countries. So one example is the fiber optic network in the Federal Electricity Commission. Part of it was tendered, and for transport, it's mostly between large cities, and those companies have now their own transport, and the rest is now we're in the middle of the process of building really telecommunications network out from those fiber optics, where what is valuable is the rights of way, not the fiber optics. So we come to the first point. Why is that valuable? Because it is so hard to get rights of way, to get permits in order to deploy infrastructure. And when I talk about this, many times people from the software industry, people from the service side say, oh, let's stop talking about infrastructure deployment, and many people are past that discussion, but we can't be. And we can't be because access is still our biggest challenge. We have more population without access than with access, and therefore this is still key. And other obstacles, lack of planning, lack of coordination. We need plans. That's what we have been doing in Mexico, and we have advanced a lot on this front. We need plans for supply, and we need plans for demand. We can change plans if reality changes, but we need to have those plans in order to be able to work together and look towards the same direction. Technology is so transversal to all sectors that if it's not clearly written down where we are heading, it's easy for different offices to start working in different directions. So plans are absolutely fundamental. And then patience and perseverance. The results of these projects are not immediate, particularly permits, rights of way, access to passive infrastructure, infrastructure sharing. Those have long-time effects. They do take a few years, but we need to do them, because otherwise if we don't, then in a few years we will be regretting that and doing that. And then the last part is subsidies wrongly focalized. That is a challenge, and subsidies economists say that subsidies are always wrongly focalized, but we need to work in targeting the population segments and the uses that are of most impact. And we need to use subsidies in a way, because all countries do in ICT infrastructures, we need to use them in a way where we are sure that we're not crowding out private investment. We need to maximize private investment for public purposes, as Dr. Pepper mentioned, and we need to intervene where there is no possibility of private investment going to that point. And it's not easy in practice, but that has to be at least the plan. And then we can make mistakes, we can review plans, but we need to know what the direction is.
Thank you, Mónica, and certainly, getting the right instruments, policy instruments right, it's always complex, and it's something that I know it's a headache for people in your position. But Wen-Hsin, I would like to go back a little bit to these obstacles that sometimes different economies are facing when they want to fully leverage these benefits of ICT. You were mentioning in your initial intervention that, of course, there are issues related to infrastructure, but there are also like softer type of issues that may be also challenging. For example, this management of change, that you have the technology, you can have access to the technology, but then there is a softer component that it's allowing people, companies, individuals to make an effective use of this ICT. And I would like to know if you can expand a little bit more about this particular aspect in terms of how you are trying to overcome this in Taiwan.
Okay, thank you. In Taiwan, most of the companies are small and medium-sized enterprises, so that we don't have the big company which can initiate some big project to look into or to explore some new frontier in the technology. So the government plays an important role for that. Normally, the government has to, other than regulation or the enforcement, the government has to lead the whole country toward some place which they think they are going to do. So government has to have the vision for the future. For instance, like ICT, where will we go? Okay, where can we go? Where we might be able to go? It depends on the country's resources and the strengths and the limitation. So select a proper project is very important for us, like the small or medium-sized country like Taiwan. And then once we have the vision, we have the direction, and then we have to set the policy and set the goal with it. And then after that, we have a few strategies to accomplish that goal, accomplish the policy. And then after that, we have initiatives. We start some national project to do things. Normally, those projects can be divided into two areas lately in the ICT, like I mentioned, two aspects. One is ICT technology. In the past, we developed technology on the broadband communication, on the three-dimension semiconductor, on many like handheld devices, things like that, so on and so forth. And right now, we are focusing on cloud computing, data center technology. We are looking into the big data applications, and we also look into the IoT in the proper size that we can handle. Okay, it's not a huge smart grid for cover very big area, but it's sizable that we can handle it better. Okay, and in Taiwan, we have a very special mechanism to make things work, to make the technology really used in the industry. We have the government, we have a research institute, and we have industry, the private sectors. The research institute is very special. President Obama has mentioned that one of the research institutes in Taiwan, which is ITRI, Industrial Technology Research Institute, Industrial Research Institute. And there's also many others like III, Institute for Information Industry. Obama has mentioned that the institute in Taiwan has been doing very good to bridge the fundamental research to the apply or the commercialized product, as well as the Fraunhofer in Germany. So I have met many people from other countries that they want to learn or experience. The key point is because in Taiwan we have small, medium-sized enterprises, they cannot afford some advanced technology. So those research institutes, they begin to do some advanced, like 3 years later technology. They develop it, transfer it to the local industry, and local industry to continue to develop that into the product to make it commercialized. Also in Taiwan, even the private industry, we have many different associations, so they can exchange information, they can exchange the idea and the trend of the development, and then sometimes they work together, and sometimes they lobby the government that which part is important that we need to do. So we all work together. It's typically the public-private partnership, PPP, okay? I think it works very fine. And that's a role we have done. And of course, we like to share the experience. Okay.
Thank you, Wen-Hsin. And I think that, what you were mentioning is that in order to overcome these obstacles, you need this vision. You obviously need resources. You need to partner between the public and the private sector in order to mobilize these resources and get engaged not only in the development and deployment of the infrastructure, but also work on the softer type of factors that are needed to maximize this impact of ICT in terms of developing the right set of skills, having the right set of connections, this triple helix strategy that was so prominent in the discussions yesterday between the collaboration between the government, the industry, and the academics. And Miguel, one of the key areas, because many countries are resource constrained, and we have to acknowledge that. But there might be some potential synergies when different countries are working together in order to, leverage their existing resources. Which is your experience in Latin America? You know that you have been traveling a lot in the region. What do you think that is the situation? Is this a potential option to, get rid of some of these resource constraints? Is it a good way to build synergies? What may be blocking this situation, and how do you think that it can be overcome?
Sure. I'm not sure if I'll answer all of that, Beñat, but I'll try. Let me give you my view on these topics and in general, based on the observation.
You have 2 minutes, by the way,
I do have
all
2
those
minutes.
questions.
Okay, that makes it more difficult. So it's going to be a telegraphic message, and let me ask for excuses to the audience. On the positive side, to me, the levers in the region right now, in Latin America and the Caribbean, there is some political buy-in, which is at the foundation of everything we're discussing, right? Be it the World Summit on Information Society created the ELAC process that was discussed here. There is some political commitment in that place, and there is the 2005 declaration in the General Assembly of the OES focused on the knowledge-based society. There is two political important messages in the region right now we can build upon. Second point, there are several countries that advance significantly in the region. They're somehow well placed in the rankings, the one that Mónica was describing and the one from the United Nations. 2 or 3 among the top 50. That creates two effects. One, you have a reference right now in the region that acts as a motivator for other governments. And the second thing is you have someone to learn from that touches upon your topic. That creates an opportunity to share and cooperate. The bank, along with the OES, created the e-government network of Latin America and the Caribbean, and we have governments sharing and working together all the time. We have a big annual meeting. You've been in one, Beñat. We have another one upcoming. And as we speak, we have at least 2 countries visiting others just to do that learning process that accelerates the advancement in those countries. The third piece is how technology is changing. The bad news is that the procurement offices lately learn how to buy technology, which is very difficult, right? To buy software and hardware. Now that they have learned how to support the technology guys in procuring, guess what? That changed. We're moving to cloud, so basically we don't have to buy too much infrastructure, hardware and software. We're buying services. Now the good news is that that transforms big upfront investments in more kind of annual services purchasing, which should make it easier for policymakers and financial ministers to support ICT projects. That's on the positive side. On the obstacles, connectivity. The good news is that, and we should be excited, we have almost 3 billion people connected to the internet. That should have us all happy. But guess what? We have 4 billion people that are not connected. More than the ones connected. So I have 2 questions. And in that regard, the situation in the region is, I would say, concerning, right, in Latin America. Access to broadband, you can go to DigiLac online, a tool that recently the IDB launched to just keep monitoring how things are going. We're below 10% average in access to fixed broadband in the region. You get your own conclusions. If you add mobile broadband, we probably reach 20-something%. So far below the developed countries. Now, we probably all agree here that connectivity, given the discussions we're having, or access to the internet, I don't know if it should be a human right, probably it should, but at least I'm sure we agree that it's a basic need nowadays, right? So the question is, how can governments still be thinking or not having a plan to be sure that every citizen in their countries is connected? I don't know of any plan in this region that clearly says that has a path to be sure that at a certain time every single citizen will be connected. Even the required investment, because probably a business case can be done. We saw here the impact economically. You can take any model, the impact on employment, or you can be just more pragmatic and along the lines of what the governor said. Listen, this is the reality. We created 130,000 jobs in this sector here. Just we don't need models. Just go and count, right? So connectivity is a huge problem. Related to that, the cost. Probably Robert can correct me, but the price, if you measure it as percentage of the gross national income per capita, the price of access to broadband is about 1.5% in developed countries, Europe, etc. It's about 20% in Latin America. It's about 40% of the gross national income. That's a huge problem. We know it. So connectivity is a big problem in the region too. Alphabetization, same thing as connectivity. I'm still waiting for the government that clearly has a plan to say, I'm going to be sure that all my citizens in my country know how to use these technologies that we all agree are key for the future of the country and the people. Financial commitments, you mentioned it very well, Beñat. There are some governments that are already committed and they're putting the money behind the strategies. That's great news. There are many others in the region, at least half of the governments in Latin America and the Caribbean, in my view, it's not my view, you can just go and check the numbers, are not investing the necessary resources. No wonder the region has 11 countries behind position number 100 in both rankings. You can take the World Economic Forum or the GITR or the UNDESA ranking. Lack of human resources. I think, Robert, you touched it upon that. That's very important, at least in this region. I think in that regard, most of the governments are aware of the situation. They need to do some serious planning in educating human resources. We at the bank experience that scarcity in our projects when there's several kind of concurrent IT projects in a country, we know it's going to be difficult to find the professionals and the providers of the IT services, and that can be a bottleneck that needs to be addressed sooner rather than later. Those, to me, are the kind of main obstacles. It took me like, I don't know, 5 or 6 minutes, so sorry, ask for excuses.
Thank you, Miguel, and I'm very happy that we have moved from ICT is not a sin from the beginning of the panel to ICT is almost a basic human right. So I think that we have been moving along our perception of ICT here. We are coming to the end of this session. We have about 9 minutes left, and we have been talking a lot about obstacles, bottlenecks, things that are hindering the potential of countries to maximize the impacts of ICT. But I would like to ask each of the panelists for their concluding remarks to focus a little bit on providing, those 2 or 3 key actions that they think that different countries, different governments in their situations should do. So at least to provide a little bit of a roadmap of which should be the next actions that they could, or that governments and also the industry and the civil society could adopt in order to overcome these obstacles and continue pushing for this maximization of ICT benefits. Wen-Hsin, if we start with you with your final conclusions and these like 2, 3 key ideas that you would leave to that you would like to leave the audience with.
Okay, I think we talk about the readiness of the ICT technology, but I think the readiness of the society is behind. And so I think the events like this is rather important and significant because we can exchange our experience with each other. When there's a when there's a success story happen in other country, that proves the feasibility in finance and the technology, demonstrate the function and the performance, and also that shows the acceptance of the local community. I think which is very important to speed up the benefit of the ICT to the economic competitiveness and to the social impact. So to share this experience, we in Taiwan, we have tried many different things, and we are willing to share it with all the audience here today. Right after this session, there is a workshop, Taiwan Mexico ICT Best Practice. For those who are interested in this, you are welcome to join us, and we can exchange ideas and experience. Thank you.
Thank you. Mónica, your final concluding remarks?
Thank you. Well, adequate legal frameworks that incentive private investment on ICT infrastructure, being predictable as governments and as regulators trust, having plans, and then being flexible, monitoring and being able to move on the way, correct focalization of subsidies, governments intervening where the private sector won't intervene, efficient allocation of existing resources, passive infrastructure, cost of deployment of broadband, skills education is still the lever for so many things, including technologies. And finally, I think we have a challenge in understanding affordability. We don't really have an international methodology to understand how much people can pay for these services, for an ICT basket, how much they are willing to pay, how much they can pay, for which kinds of services. If we change the offer, do we sell something different? Because at the end, we want to minimize government intervention and have people be consumers, be powerful in that sense, and buy those services. But we don't really understand in the international scene how to measure affordability. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mónica. Miguel,
Thank you, Beñat. I would say, to me, the steps every government in the region should take would be, first of all, diagnose, know your reality. It seems obvious, but many governments do not know their reality about the lack of human resources, etc. Second, make a business case, very important. We need to convince politicians, and politicians need clear business cases. I mean, what's going to be the return of the effort? Third, I agree with Mónica, do the strategy and the plan. With the plan, it seems very obvious, but I invite you to go over the Red GL website and see the plans and strategies. What I'm going to say is not always there. Set up clear objectives, clear targets. I don't see always that information, and related to that, put the required investment, the money needed, or else it will not show up. For all those processes, the bank can help. We are doing a big effort in facilitating access to knowledge to the countries, the latest knowledge, access to good practices, advising in preparing the projects, and obviously as a bank, even the funding. The Red GL is one of the tools. DigiLac that I mentioned is another tool. So those would be my advice. And if, as a final thought, I mean, I was thinking probably everyone here have read about the acquisition by Microsoft of this Swedish game company, MOEA. This mind break game. They paid $2 billion. $2 billion for a 40 people company based in Sweden. I wonder if the next one is not in this building that the government of Jalisco described, or everywhere in Latin America. Imagine $2 billion revenue in one shot for this region or any other region in Latin America. That helps to make the business case to politicians to take seriously the policies related to the advancements of ICTs.
Thank you very much, Miguel. And finally, Robert, which are your concluding remarks about what countries should do to maximize their...
Thank you. Picking up on what's been said by each of my co-panelists, I think where you have to start is absolutely set your priorities, and the way you do that is you assess gaps. What do I mean by that? There are a lot of, and we've actually analyzed over 160 national plans and strategies. They're very nice and aspirational, but most of them are not implementable. So to bring it down to the ground and be very practical, very pragmatic, we need to do an assessment to set the priorities. We need to set those priorities based upon what's the most feasible. Nothing's easy, but what's feasible, but also what has the highest impact. Where do you start? What are the interdependencies? What's the sequence of events? How do you move from aspiration to an executable, implementable agenda? Right? And as you do that, you need to recognize, as we've discussed, that most, but not all, most of the investment will come from the private sector. And then there are the gaps where it's going to have to be the government moving a variety of levers, including coming to the bank. But in order to do that, you need to align the incentives. If you have incentives aligned, you can make huge progress. But it's not just aligning the incentives between the government and the private sector and the NGOs, it's also aligning the incentives within government, right? You have to have buy-in across government departments, and this is the governance question. It can't just start and stop with the minister or the Ministry of Communications or the telecom regulator. You need the Minister of Finance, the Minister of Economy, the Minister of Education, the Minister of Healthcare, the Minister of Interior. You need the cabinet. You need the leadership from the very top of government. And that's where you get the political buy-in. And once you have that, you can do anything. The last thing is, Mónica talked about the importance of having patience, and I agree. But I also think it's important to be a little bit impatient in order to drive the agenda. Thank you.
Thank you, Robert. And with those final words, I would like to thank all our panelists for their extraordinary contributions. I hope that you found this session interesting, and a big round of applause for our panelists. Thank you.